real quick, if you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. Also, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at Campfire Cult Pod for free. It'll really help us reach listeners just like you. If you want to become a Patreon cult member to get extended episodes and other full Patreon-only episodes, you can sign up at patreon.com/campfirecultpod for only $5 a month. And finally, if you don't mind, please share, rate, and review wherever possible. Welcome, dear listener, to the Campfire Cult Podcast. From a camper van deep in the haunted woods, I bring you first-hand accounts of chilling encounters with the paranormal. Step into the night and take a peek into the realm where reality and the supernatural collide. My name is Jazz, and I'll be your host. Welcome back, campers, and happy Halloween. Tonight we're opening the door to a story that feels like a dream you can't quite shake. The kind where everything looks familiar, your old neighborhood, your school, the faces you once knew, but something beneath it all hums wrong. This is another tale from writer Saturdead, the mind behind the Tomskog Universe. A world where memory, identity, and madness bleed together in the most unsettling ways. This story isn't about the year you graduated. It's about the year you were taken, shaped, erased, and rewritten. It's about a program that promised to make the future brighter, but left its subjects hollowed out, haunted by names and faces they no longer recognize. So pour yourself something dark, kill the lights, and settle in. Because not every experiment ends when the test subjects leave the room. Some continue in the quiet corners of your mind, waiting for the right frequency, the right word, the right story to bring it all back. Let's begin.
My teenage years were a mess. My mom and dad went through a bad divorce and they were trying to figure out two brand new lives. I ended up somewhere in between as I adjusted to an irregular schedule and sudden move. When my mom got full custody, I was in my last year of high school. We'd just moved a year prior, and now we were about to move again. Just 6 months from graduation, we moved all the way to San Antonio. Quite the different vibe from a no-one-cares kind of town in Minnesota. So yeah, I graduated at the turn of the millennium, class of 2000. If I'm honest, I rarely think about that year when I lived in Minnesota. I mean, I remember it, but I'd be hard-pressed to tell you anything about it. I remember the high school and how I thought it was weird they could afford a pool. I remember the Babin siblings being creeps, or that one Christian girl who couldn't stop talking about how she was saving herself for someone special. There was the guy who stayed in the computer hall all day and the gym bro, and the guy who kept getting shoved into lockers. People called him Handsome Man, as a cruel mockery. I think my favorite was a guy named Hank. His dad was a plumber and he was going to be a plumber too. Hank was the kind of guy who liked collecting things. Weird things like lost screws, pop tabs, or bottle caps. He would categorize them by color or weight and keep them in little jars in his locker. The one time I saw it, he had like 30 jars, all meticulously sorted. That's the one guy I guess I could call a friend from back then. He was going to be a plumber. I was going to be a veterinarian. I reached my goal, but I have no idea if Hank ever did. I haven't thought about those days in Tomskog High in a while. I've had no reason to, really. That is, until not too long ago. Nowadays, I live out in Kerrville. I got a wife, 2 kids, 2 cars, and a very pampered golden retriever. Being a veterinarian, we've saved a lot on bills for that pup. My kids are about the same age that I was when things went to shit, but I'm glad to say that cycle is broken. I'm happily married. We've had a few hiccups along the way, but it's been more like sleep on the couch kind of hiccups, not the get out of my life kind. In this kind of life, you don't need to think back on your teenage years. You're busy worrying about your kids' college applications and tuition, or that weird sound you hear when you take a sudden right with your car, or why your favorite shirt is starting to feel too tight. My hair's gone a little too thin, my eyes are a little darker, and I have a harder time staying awake during movie night. But that's all just flavor, you know? It's all just life. A whole bunch of little worries. So when I had a couple strangers come knock on my door, I didn't think much of it. I was home alone on a Sunday. I just walked Kitten, yes, the dog is named Kitten, and was about to settle down for lunch when there was a knock at the door. A white van with the logo of a wrench, a cogwheel, and a couple of pipes. Very generic. I opened the door to see two men in orange coveralls and full tool belts. They introduced themselves with a company name I didn't recognize. They asked me about my name, and I confirmed my identity. The city is taking steps to minimize damage from flash flooding, one of them explained. We're doing some groundwork, looking at possible run-through. Since you live at the end of the block, chances are we're gonna have to go all around your property. So what are we looking at? I asked. 2, maybe 3 months of roadwork a stone's toss away from your bedroom window, he continued, unless we can work something out and go straight through your backyard. Then we're looking at a month, tops. I think I'd be entitled for some compensation then, and I'd have to talk to my wife about it. Of course, he nodded. Come along, I'll show you what we're working with. I stepped out of the house looking back at Kitten. He wasn't happy about it. Tail between his legs and all. I closed the door and followed the men to the van. The moment they opened the side door, I was confused. There were no pipes, no tools, nothing. It was a blacked-out storage van with soundproofed walls. One of them pulled a hood over my head. The other tased me. It felt like they'd tied all my nerves to a single spot and were trying to rip them out of my skin. They must have practiced this 100 times. It was so fast. Just a couple of seconds, then I was face down in the back of a van with my legs and hands zip-tied. One of them stayed in the back while the other sped off. A couple of streets later, they stopped. They did something to the side of the van, presumably changing or removing the logo, as well as changing the license plate. Meanwhile, the guy in the back wrapped me up in some kind of plastic.
The best thing you can do is be quiet and still,
He explained.
Are we going to have a problem?
I remember trying to ask 100 questions at once. There was no reason this should happen to me. I wasn't involved in anything sketchy, and we didn't have millions stashed away in some Looney Tunes kind of safe in my wife's home office. They hadn't even checked my wallet for cash, they just took my cell phone. I finally managed to get a question out. What do you want? I'll be honest, he said, I have no idea. We drove for a couple of hours. They sat me up and chained me to the wall. I was given some apple juice through a straw. For some reason, they treated me like I was dangerous. They would shy away from me whenever I moved. I could hear their tools rattling as if they were prepared to tase me if I said something they didn't like. You lose a sense of time when you're wearing a bag over your head, and your heart beats at 150 miles per hour. But eventually, they stopped the van. We were somewhere far out. The road had felt uneven, and I could hear birds chirping. A light shone through my bag as they opened one of the side doors and got into a heated conversation. How can this be the guy? The driver said. He's not trying anything, we've seen nothing. He's on the list, it's best not to question it. But what if we got it wrong? You saw what it took to dredge the fucking melonhead out of the lake. That tickled something in my brain. I hadn't heard that nickname in years. There was this one guy who used to stay in the gym a lot. He had a rounder kind of head than most people. Not like misshapen or anything. Just unusual by comparison. He liked the nickname though, he thought melonhead meant he had a big brain. I could still imagine him doing lifts saying more, more, more between each rep. But that's when it first hit me. They were talking about my class that one year back in Minnesota. This had something to do with my high school years. I was only there for a couple of months, I said out loud. We had to move. The guy in the back stepped back in and leaned down to me. I explained at length how my mother had moved to Minnesota on a whim, and how we'd left well before graduation. So you never got the shots? Nothing. What are you talking about? I could hear hesitation in his voice. Someone had messed up somewhere down the line. The two of them stepped away. Look, the driver said, We can either be the ones who took some initiative and disobeyed a direct order, or we can do what we're told. So we're going to stick him in the pods with those things? You want to risk it? I mean, even if we're right, do you want to take the risk of showing them we're willing to disobey an order? That shut down the conversation. Mistake or not, they weren't about to turn back. They drove all night. I was given some kind of fruit sauce from a tube as a meal. By morning, we'd pulled up to an industrial complex. I could hear the machinery and power tools going off as metal struck metal. There were people there too. Dozens of them. The moment we stepped out of the van, someone bumped into us. It was clear that wherever we were, they were in on it. I was led into a quieter room in the back and asked to step inside what felt like a locker. Rubber floor and walls, barely big enough for my shoulders to fit. They strapped me in, allowing me to effectively sit in there, but there was just no way to get comfortable. Then they tipped the entire thing, making me feel like I was lying in a coffin. It was completely soundproof and dark. A voice came through from an internal speaker.
"We're releasing the straps in a moment. Then you can take off your hood. It's going to be a long ride. Try to get some sleep."
"How long?" I asked. "Where are we going?" There was no answer. The straps came undone with a click, and I threw off my hood. It was pitch black. I barely knew if my eyes were open or not. Blinking was just a reflex. The air was stale, as a small fan spun somewhere around the top of my head. I could barely move, and I felt this heaviness in my chest. Like if I somehow drew too deep a breath, the air would run out, or my rib cage would bump against the lid. It was so disorienting, and I remember banging on what I thought was a door. I needed a light, a window, something to orient myself around. But there was no response. I didn't even know if they were still out there. What would I do if I got left in there? What if they just walked away? I tried telling myself it was going to be a long ride, but I had no idea. It wasn't just a long ride. It was close to torture. I was flipped, stacked, pushed, and at one point, dropped in freefall. The pod cushioned all blows, and since I could barely move, I couldn't really hurt myself from being in an unfortunate stance. It was clever, but man, was it uncomfortable. I lost all sense of time there. It might have been a couple of hours, could have been a whole day. They had this little hatch on the side where they got me a bottle of water or a tube of fruit sauce. I had 2 more meals, so I'm thinking it all took about a day. I know there was a flight involved, though. My ears popped. I was half asleep the next time they used the speaker.
"We'll be opening the doors in 10 seconds. Make no sudden movements."
I counted in my head, but I must have gotten it wrong. I was only at 5 when the door popped open. 2 masked men with bulletproof vests and assault rifles. A man in a white lab coat with a protective face mask. A white room with blinding fluorescent lights. They made me turn away and put restraints on as I was dragged to a chair and made to sit down. I felt so weak, like I'd been pulled out of bed at 3 in the morning. The man in the lab coat got down on one knee to face me.
Where did you graduate?
Southwest.
San Antonio, right?
Right.
Where were you before that?
I explained the circumstances. My time in Tomskog, Minnesota. A couple of years in West Virginia. Before that, South Dakota. That's where I'd spent most of my life. The man was very patient, allowing me to explain. I saw him making notes on a clipboard, doing check marks next to lines my eyes were too fuzzy to read.
Checks out. You were never part of the class long enough to get any booster shots or heat therapy.
No, nothing like that.
So when you hear names like Digman, Babin, Bogan, that means nothing to you?
It rings a bell, but I shrugged. I could hear the resignation in his voice as he got back up, giving the others a long look. The armed men shuffled about, looking at one another.
Put him in a room. He's not part of the subject line. I'll sort it out. Go ahead and tell Ridge to prep for extraction.
Sir?
The man's a fucking veterinarian. What the hell are we gonna use him for? You that desperate to get your cat's teeth cleaned?
No, sir.
They led me through the facility. All corridors sort of looked the same, but they were brimming with people. You could hear all sorts of noises. I recognized one as a bone saw. We went past this one room where they had a pod like mine on a table, preparing for surgery. I was escorted to a small room, bright as all hell, but there was a dimmer switch. Sleek interior, like if Apple made a hotel room, lights along the ridges of the furniture, a ceiling fan that could be heard but not seen, a TV built into the wall, a queen-sized bed, a couch, a bedside table with a water pitcher and a glass, a bathroom with a shower, a mini fridge with a couple of snacks and sodas. Honestly, I'd slept in worse places. I took some time to decompress. I was still a prisoner, but at least they were hearing me out. I figured there'd been a mistake, but I couldn't figure out exactly what. Maybe someone in that class had done something terrible, and everyone they'd been involved with was under scrutiny. But if so, why wait this long? I couldn't figure it out. But I counted my blessings. I was out of that damned pod. With a little luck, I might be able to get on a flight back home sooner rather than later. I couldn't imagine how worried my family might be. Coming home to an empty house and an unlocked front door? They must have called the police. I managed to get the TV going. They had a couple of movies available, so I put something on just to not get drowned in my own thoughts. It was then that I realized just how high-strung I really was. I could feel my muscles relaxing and my heart slowing. I'd been on the verge of collapse all this time, and only now could I feel some semblance of recovery. I took a shower and changed into some fresh clothes. There was a wardrobe with generic slacks and t-shirts. I figured they wouldn't mind. I was halfway through a Bill Murray comedy when the door opened. A woman in a gray pantsuit was escorted inside by an armed guard. I was forced up against the wall on the opposite side of the room. They checked my pockets for weapons and had me sit on the bed. As he finished, the woman turned to him. I think she was in her mid-30s, had this short, almost platinum blonde stubble of hair.
We got it from here. You can wait outside.
The man left. She sat down on the couch across from me, looking at the paused frame of the movie with a vacant smile.
I just think we ought to have a conversation. I don't want to interrupt your personal time.
I can talk, I assured her.
There's been a level of miscommunication, as I'm sure you're aware.
You mind telling me why I'm here? What you think you're doing? She gave me a long look, tilting her head.
I want you to consider something. Think about where you are, about who you might be talking to. Consider the lengths we've gone to in order to get you here, into this room. Now ask yourself this. Is asking me a question like that beneficial to your current situation?
I shook my head, staying quiet.
I would agree, so maybe we should stick to me asking the questions.
She went through a list of checkpoints, asking about my mental and physical health. She asked me about people I spent a lot of time with, about my children and spouse. It's as if they were looking to see if anything stood out. She couldn't find anything. She corroborated my accounts with what had been said previously, adding little check marks to a list.
Well, it appears you weren't supposed to be on that list. I suppose an apology would be in order.
She turned to me, putting away her notepad. She opened a shoulder bag, producing a set of papers and a pen.
This has been an unfortunate misunderstanding, and we will be sure to rectify it. I think we can come to terms.
Does this involve me being put in an unmarked grave?
Nothing quite so dramatic. That would create a lot of questions. I think the best thing for both of us is to arrange a small cover story and compensate you handsomely for your time.
I was given a contract with a firm called Hatchet Pharmaceuticals. This contract confirmed that I'd been consulting them on an important project. They spelled out a point list of items to be compensated for, like food, hotel rooms, overtime pay, all the bells and whistles. There were receipts. All in all, it was more than fair compensation, just over 6 figures. A solid cover story.
We're very thorough. We can assign a representative to explain the situation to your family.
I think that'd be for the best, I agreed. And after this, we're done. We walk away, correct?
Correct. I'll have you on a flight first thing in the morning.
I had no further questions. I signed it.
I hope you see why we can't let you roam the facility. You'll have to stay the night, but we'll do our best to accommodate you.
That's fine. Just an early flight, the earliest.
Of course, no problem.
She got up, leaving a copy of the contract. As she left the room, I noticed the armed guard still waiting outside. She turned to me a final time.
I'll get you a root beer. I know you like them.
I can't say she was wrong. I suspect they'd taken a step back and examined what they knew about me a little closer. For a couple of hours, I was comfortable. They got me a proper steak dinner and a root beer, and I ended up watching movies until I fell asleep. The lighting was pretty impressive. It started to dim on its own once it noticed me getting into bed. In that moment, I was positive about the whole thing. I'd been compensated. There would be an apology and explanation given to my family, and I could put it all behind me once and for all. Now I just had to wait for that early plane and hope for the best. I didn't have a clock or anything, but I must have slept for about 2 hours when I noticed something. The buzz of the ceiling fan stopped, and the dimmed lights went completely black. I waved my arm a little to see if there was a sensor, but nothing happened. Getting up, I went to check the door. It must have had some kind of magnetic lock because I still couldn't open it. Then I did something, it's hard to explain why. I heard this thumping noise and I just had this feeling. Like, it's one thing to hear footsteps, but this sounded wrong. I stepped aside and pressed myself up against the wall, facing away from the door. Seconds later, something stopped outside my room, and I hear this metallic groan. The door was bent open inch by inch. Mechanisms snapped and bent from immense pressure. Something was standing in the doorway. I heard this low rumble, like a snoring bull. Then a crack, followed by a loud chewing, like someone eating a fresh carrot. I could smell this sharp tang of iron in the air as there was another snap. The intruder was dragging something along the ground, taking the occasional bite. Snap, chew, snap, chew. The lights in the hall were still out, so even though the door was open, I couldn't see a thing. I held my breath and ducked down low as a large hand swept by just to my right. It was looking for the dimmer switch. When it realized it wasn't working, it snorted and left the room, lumbering off down the hallway, dragging a snack along. I used my hands to feel my way out the door. It was bent in the middle and barely clinging to its hinges. The lock mechanism was still there, but it was so busted that you could pull it out with your bare fingers. I almost slipped in something as I reached the opposite wall. Something must have happened, and I'd be stupid to just sit and wait for it to blow over. There was a hum. A short, low hum, some kind of backup generator came on, bathing the hallway in a red light. My eyes adjusted as I realized I was standing in a liquid that covered most of the hallway. It might have been red, it was impossible to tell, but given how it smelled, I'm pretty sure I was standing in a pool of blood. There were torn pieces of armor splattered on the walls, along with patches of skin clinging to the fabric. I'd never seen anything like it. It's hard to be afraid of something so violent. It's one thing to see a strange man with a knife, that is scary. But to see a pile of corpses out in the open? I mean, yes, that's scary, but it's almost too scary. I remember watching that patch of skin slide down the wall, shaking my head, thinking that there was no point in trying to understand what had happened. There was no point in asking questions. I just had to get out of there. I tried to backtrack through the hallways. There were these pipes on the walls in different colors and symbols, but I couldn't make sense of them. They were most likely there to help guide people to various departments. There were arrows, though, so I figured if I went the opposite way, that should bring me back to the origin point, or maybe even the exit. What had happened in my corridor was no isolated incident. There were signs of struggles all over. The room where they had prepped for surgery was covered in black goo and had a hand pressed against hardened glass. There was another room that, when you got close, your hearing stopped, like when you get water in your ear, only deeper. I couldn't even hear my heartbeat. I could feel it, but it's hard to explain. It was as if something bad was waiting around every corner, and the further I got, the worse it felt. My hearing eventually returned. It felt like coming up from a deep dive. I walked through a corridor where I could hear something eating in the next room, something making bird noises. I did see a couple of living people, but they had these strange white masks on and didn't seem to respond to anything. Absolutely everything had gone to shit in a matter of hours. I heard voices up ahead. My first instinct was to run ahead and see what was going on, but I stopped myself. From what I'd seen so far, things weren't that simple. I stayed by the corner, listening.
Door locked? Yes, it's locked.
And a third person joins the conversation, wandering in from an adjoining corridor.
You masked faces happy just standing here?
A man's voice. He had a strange intonation, like he couldn't help but to end his sentences in a gulping noise. It reminded me of one of the kids I went to high school with, Roy. He had this speech impediment, like a stutter. He'd stop it by swallowing hard and shaking his head like a tick. It was such a specific noise. It was hard to pinpoint with a description. But that's where it hit me. Roy, Melonhead. These were old Minnesota classmates. They'd brought in me on suspicion of being part of this class. Chances were that these same people had been brought in as well. That may very well be Roy on the other side of the hallway. But if that was the case, what did that mean? Was all this chaos perpetrated by my old classmates? If so, what the hell happened to them? Making my way to the main corridor, I ran across a series of gruesome sights. There was a man covered head to toe in some kind of black acid, melting him into bone. There were several patrols of people with white masks, speaking to each other like grunting cavemen. I stopped counting dead bodies after 20, instead trying to keep my eyes on the marks on the wall. I eventually got to a lobby of sorts. 2 massive storm doors had gone down, blocking the exit. There'd been a massacre. At least 8, maybe 10 people, all crushed against the door. They'd tried to get out, but got caught on the wrong side. The red lights on the wall span round and round, making the shadows livelier than the remains that cast them. I heard someone approaching and escaped into a side room. There was a couch, a drink machine, a microwave, and a fridge. Clearly some kind of lunchroom. The red light didn't reach all the way in, casting a long strand of red peeking through the half-closed door. I hurried inside and pressed myself up against the wall. It didn't take me long to realize I wasn't alone. Someone was hiding behind the couch.
You need to leave. I have a gun.
I shook my head and put a finger on my lips to shush them. I could hear someone approaching from outside.
You need to leave right now. I'm not asking. This is my spot.
I shook my head again. If they fired a weapon, this place would be crawling with things in a matter of seconds. They'd doom us both. Problem was, something was already coming our way. The door creaked a little. I could see the shadow of 2 long legs as something bent down to enter. It's impossible to describe the scale of this thing. It was at least 10, maybe 11 feet tall. Like an elongated person. A slick, black, jelly-like skin rippling with chunks. As it moved, I could spot patches of white poking out at different angles. Bones. Like someone had deconstructed a person and jammed it into a walking puddle. There was hesitation. Whoever was hiding in there with me decided to shut the hell up. A long arm reached out, touching the side of the drink machine. It was such a casual movement, but it was forceful enough to knock the whole thing onto the floor with a bang. A couple of cans rattled out of it. The tall thing poked around a little, making one of the cans burst from the pressure. That seemed to amuse it. It pulled on a pop tab, seemingly frustrated. I could hear something in the distance, like a whir getting louder and louder, then a series of mechanical clicking and a spark. The lights were coming back on. The red gave way to harsh fluorescent light as I saw this thing in full and clear view. It was barely keeping itself together. It was like if someone was trying to hold Jell-O with a 2-pronged fork. It was looking at the person hiding behind the couch. They weren't as well hidden as they thought they were. It only took me a brief glance to realize it was the woman with the gray pantsuit that had talked to me earlier. As the thing saw her, she pulled out her gun. I covered my ears and sunk to the floor. There was gunfire and screaming. The creature had a hand big enough to cover her face and used it to push the back of her head into the ground. It must have had some kind of suction force to it as the body stuck to it. The screams came and went in a flash. There really was no fanfare to it. Just a quick snap, and then nothing. By the time I looked up, the thing was already looking at more interesting items around the room. It seemed particularly curious about the soda cans. That it was holding a whole corpse seemed more like an inconvenience. But as it turned to leave, it spotted me. There was a moment of silence as it looked at me, as if trying to understand what it was seeing. A single soda can rolled across the floor, touching my foot. I looked at it, then up at the creature. Why was it so interested? What was the deal? I picked up the can, popped it open, and held it up. "Is this it?" I asked. "Do you want me to open it?" It tilted its head. It wasn't convinced. It reached out, carefully, poking the pop tab. I pulled it off, presenting it. "This?" I asked. "You want this?" An oil-slick hand reached for it, accidentally grazing my finger. The skin on my index finger turned a sickly orange as my nail darkened. I could feel a deep ache, as if my nerve was hardening. My finger curled in on itself as it picked up the pop tab. It held it up, looking at it from different angles. I only knew of one person who collected things like that. I pointed at a nearby table. "There are cups," I said. "You can put it in a cup. Collect them. Put them all together again. All the same, just like you want it to." The thing turned its head. At least I think it did. It was hard to see that it was looking one way or another at all. I don't even think it had eyes to begin with. As it turned its attention to the other soda cans and the empty coffee cups, I reached for what remained of the lady in gray. Half of her was still hanging out of that thing, dangling like a broken doll. There was a twitch to the leg, like there was something inside trying to get her to run. Like an operator calling out on a line where no one's listening. She was still holding something in her hand, barely visible through the black sludge. I bent her hand open. It made a snapping noise as a tendon protested, revealing a key card. I pulled it loose, only for the sludge thing to turn my way. It did not appreciate this intrusion. With one step, it closed the distance. It reached for me with its free hand. I had to do something or I'd be next. "Hank," I called out. "It's Hank, right?" The hand slowed, dropping to the floor. The ceramic tiles turned a sickly blue, fizzling. I could see something just beneath the surface of the sludge. A cranium. There really was some kind of head under there, and it was looking my way. "You collect things," I said. "You arrange them in jars. You had them in your locker." It stared at me as something bubbled beneath its surface, bones moving up and down, rearranging themselves. "Is that what you're doing?" I asked. "Are you collecting now?" It bobbed its head. "If we go outside, you can collect so many more things," I said. "But then we gotta open the door." It bobbed its head again and stepped back, leaving room for me to leave. I did. The main lobby was filled with various things. People in masks. Something large, chewing on an arm. I think I saw the Babin siblings in there, but I can't say for sure. The large thing in the back stepped forward the moment it saw me, pointing with its whole arm. There was no doubt in my mind that I knew this person. Melonhead. His facial features looked a bit exaggerated from when I'd last seen him, and he was a whole lot taller. But it was him. I barely recognized him as human now. Having an almost grayish skin and dark eyes, I could see him salivating as he dropped a bloodless limb to the floor, advancing towards me in a jog. The sludge thing came up from behind, swinging an arm in a wide arc. It smacked Melonhead over the jaw, sending him reeling back, scratching at his face. The sludge thing was making sure I made it to the door. I could feel the weight of inhuman eyes staring me down. I hurried up to a control panel on the wall, swiping the access card.
"Step 1 authorization complete,"
said an automated system.
"Please present your hand for biometric confirmation."
I swallowed hard as Hank dropped an acid-burned arm next to me. It was surprisingly heavy. I held it up to the panel, manually adjusting the fingers. My stomach churned. It felt like playing with raw chicken.
"Please hold,"
the system asked as a taskbar reached 100%. Then green lights. The storm doors started rolling. Some of them ran, some of them screamed with joy. A couple didn't say a thing. A couple of people with white masks kept guns at the ready, scanning the area for threats. Melonhead lumbered outside looking for his next snack. And finally, the sludge. He put the coffee cup down, realizing there wouldn't be any more pop tabs around for a while. He wandered off without looking back, stretching out to the point where he rivaled the treetops. By the time the lobby was empty, I stepped outside. Some of them had run into the woods. A couple of them had moved down a westbound path towards the barracks. There was a pine forest ahead, so I guessed I was somewhere in the Midwest or North. The birds sounded familiar somehow.
Not much of a reunion, huh, buddy?
That strange voice again. The gulping. I didn't need to turn around to know I was talking to one of the Babin siblings. I turned to face him, a pale man with slick hair combed back, a hawk-like nose and these chemically wide eyes. He leaned against the open storm door in a parody of casualness.
I recognize you, class of 2000.
Yeah, I nodded. Tomskog High.
Didn't you move?
This is when I noticed he had a knife. He was picking his nails with it. I did. San Antonio.
That's too bad. We had a lot of fun after graduation.
I can imagine.
I really don't think that's possible.
He gave me a pat on the shoulder as he passed me by, trying to catch up to his sister. His head bent forward, his steps like that of a prowling cassowary. I managed to get to a highway. From there, I got in touch with the police. From there, it was a series of phone calls, a booked plane, and a tearful reunion with my family. I didn't know what to say to them. Was I still bound by that contract? Was there anyone left in that facility to reimburse me? I had no idea. I stuck to the story as well as I could. I did get a check in the mail not long after, printed on cheap paper with a stamped blue sunflower logo. It came with a notice that I would only be getting one payment. They were shutting down that branch of the organization for an emergency restructuring. I guess Hatchet Pharmaceuticals is getting shuttered. I couldn't care less, if I'm honest. I got paid, and I got out. I had to go through surgery to get my finger fixed. The acid burn was bad, and they described the damage as my index finger trying to pull into itself. Had to walk around with a cast for weeks. I know this all seems too fantastic to be true. A lot of things are. I could write a full book on any one of those corridors, but looking back now, it all feels like a distant dream. It was so unreal that it felt like it happened to someone else. And it's not what I saw that haunts me the most, it's what I felt. A pulse beating out of my chest, not knowing if the next beat will be my last. Stepping around the corner, praying that no one heard me struggling to breathe. That feeling comes back every now and then. I can be standing in my bedroom looking at the door, and I just get this sense that there is someone waiting on the other side. There isn't, but that doesn't stop me from thinking there is. I have not been contacted about the class of 2000 since. I have not heard the name of Tomskog High mentioned. There have been no emails, no texts, no strange visits, no white vans pulling up in my driveway telling me lies. And I don't know if that's a good thing. Something tells me it isn't.
That's all for tonight, dear listeners. Once again, I'd like to thank Saturdead for allowing me to feature these stories as a narrated podcast episode. You can find a link to more of Saturdead's short stories in the show notes. And please remember, if you want to support this podcast and love a damn good cup of coffee, head on over to outlandscoffee.com and use code CAMPFIRE for $5 off your first order and give us a try. If you want to become a Patreon cult member to get extended episodes and other full Patreon-only episodes, you can sign up at patreon.com/campfirecultpod for only $5 a month. Until next time, I'll be leaving you in the dark where whispers linger and shadows dance. Stay weary, sleep well, and beware the whispers in the night. If you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. You can follow us anywhere on social media at Campfire Cult Pod and online at campfirecultpod.com. And finally, if you don't mind, please rate and review wherever possible.